Long ago, before the final battle between the living and the dead, things were very different in the north. Sansa Stark had returned to Winterfell, cold in her heart, older in her soul. She had been through pain, through lies, through loss. She had seen how cruel the world could be. She had trusted people and they had broken her. So now she only trusted herself. Jon Snow was the king in the north, and Daenerys Targaryen had arrived with her dragons. They were planning to fight the Night King, who was marching south with an army of the dead. But nobody really knew how dark the future would become. One night, while everyone else was making plans for war, Sansa walked alone into the forest near Winterfell. The snow was thick, the wind was howling. She needed silence, peace, something to clear her mind. But that night, the forest wasn't quiet. That night, something waited for her. The trees around her grew colder, the snow fell heavier, and, in front of her, a figure stepped out from the dark. Tall, pale, eyes like blue fire. It was the Night King. But he didn't kill her. He didn't even try. He just stood there and looked at her. Sansa didn't move. She wanted to scream, to run, but something inside her kept her feet frozen. Not from fear, from something else, a strange calm. The Night King raised his hand, and behind him the dead came, but they didn't attack. They simply knelt. And then he spoke, not in words, not with a voice, but with thoughts, like a cold wind in her mind. "You have ice in your heart," the voice said. "Fire has failed you. The living betrayed you. Come with me and I will show you power. No lies, no pain, no fear." Sansa couldn't breathe. It felt like a dream, but it was real. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just stood there, and the cold wrapped around her like a blanket. The next day, she was gone. Jon and Daenerys searched. Arya ran through the woods, shouting her name. Bran looked with his third eye, but he saw nothing. It was like Sansa had disappeared from the world, but she hadn't. Far beyond the wall, deep in the lands of snow and death, Sansa stood beside the Night King. He never smiled. He never spoke out loud, but he showed her things, old magic, cold truth, memories of pain. He showed her how the living had burned witches, how they had killed their own, how fire only destroyed, but ice remembered. He made her drink from a dark pool under the weirwood tree where ancient voices whispered. And when she woke, her eyes were blue, her skin pale as moonlight. Her red hair glowed like blood on snow. Sansa Stark was no more. She was the Night Queen now, and with every breath she felt stronger, smarter, colder. She didn't cry anymore. She didn't feel fear. She remembered Ramsay. She remembered Cersei. She remembered Littlefinger. And she whispered, "Never again." The Night King gave her an army. Not just whites, but White Walkers born from the frozen children of the forest. And she gave them something he didn't have: strategy, planning, patience. She taught them how to wait, how to strike, not just hard but smart. With her mind and his power, they were unstoppable. And in Winterfell, the cold grew deeper each day. The snow didn't melt, the walls cracked, and Jon began to dream, strange dreams of Sansa standing in a blizzard, her eyes glowing, whispering his name like a ghost. He thought it was just a nightmare. He was wrong. She was coming, and this time, she would decide who deserved to live. The cold touched everything. Winterfell's fires burned all night, but no heat stayed in the stones. Jon Snow stood on the wall, watching the horizon. No birds, no wind, just silence. Thick, heavy silence. Like the world was holding its breath. He didn't sleep much, not since Sansa disappeared. Something inside him said she wasn't dead, but he couldn't explain it. It was more than a feeling. It was like a part of her still lived inside him, and it was changing. Bran sat by the fire, his eyes far away. Arya sharpened her blade over and over, saying nothing. Daenerys tried to lead, tried to plan, but the people were afraid. They whispered now, not about the Night King, but about Sansa. She went with him, someone whispered in the hall. She chose him. She was taken, Jon said, louder than he meant to. But the words felt weak even in his mouth. Was it true? Far in the north, Sansa stood on a frozen hill, looking at what had once been a wildling camp. Now it was a kingdom of ice. Her castle was carved from glacier and shadow. Her throne was bone white, made of twisted roots, frozen solid. She sat, in silence, as White Walkers brought her messages. No words, just images, visions in ice. She saw Winterfell covered in frost. She saw Jon, Arya, Bran, all waiting for the dead. But she didn't want to destroy them, not yet. Sansa remembered what it felt like to be weak, to beg for help and be ignored. She remembered her aunt pushing her through the Vale's madness. She remembered Ramsay's eyes in the dark. She remembered how she screamed and no one came. Now they would listen. The Night King stood beside her, but he never touched her. There was no love there, no warmth, only respect, cold respect. He had made her his equal, his queen. She ruled half the army now, and with every night she raised more from the snow. But one thing burned inside her still, not anger, not hate. A question. Would Jon stop her? She still remembered his voice, his eyes. He was the only one who truly looked at her and saw more than a Stark girl. He saw the woman she had become, but that woman was gone now. The snow had melted her. Still, in the silence of her icy hall, she whispered his name. Jon. That same night, Jon woke up with a chill in his bones. He had dreamed of her again. But this time, she wasn't standing far away. She was close, near enough to touch. Her hand was on his chest. Her eyes, glowing blue, looked into his soul, and she said only one word. Choose. Jon sat up, sweating in the cold. Something was coming, not just death, not just the Night King, but something smarter, something worse. Bran rolled his eyes back and fell into a vision. Arya stood beside him, holding his hand. When he came back, his face was pale. She's alive, Bran said, but she's not Sansa anymore. Jon stared at him. What do you mean? She sits beside him now. She wears a crown of ice. She commands the cold. And she knows us. She knows everything. Arya shook her head. She wouldn't do this. Bran looked at her with no emotion. She already has. The council room grew tense. Daenerys walked in, her face hard. If she stands with the Night King, she said, then she is our enemy. Jon didn't answer, because part of him still hoped, still believed there was a piece of Sansa inside the Night Queen, but he didn't know how long that piece would last. And in the far north, Sansa sat alone in her icy chamber, watching a flame trapped in a frozen glass. It flickered, weak but alive. Jon's soul. She kept it safe. For now, but even ice melts when it gets too close to fire, and war was coming. Snow fell heavier now, not the soft kind that melts on your skin. This snow was sharp, like tiny blades falling from the sky. It covered the land fast. Whole villages vanished overnight. Rivers froze mid-flow. People said it was the long night again, but this time it had a queen. Jon stood in the great hall of Winterfell. The walls cracked from the cold. The air inside burned your lungs when you breathed. He watched the northern road, waiting, hoping, dreading. They hadn't seen the enemy yet, but the signs were everywhere. Frozen animals, whole forests turned to crystal, a mist that moved like it was alive. And sometimes in the wind they heard a woman's voice, soft, cold, familiar. Winterfell will fall, Daenerys said. Her voice was sharp. We must strike before they reach us. Jon shook his head. We don't know what she wants. She wants what all monsters want, she said. To rule, to destroy. And you still call her she, like she's your sister. That thing out there is not Sansa. But Jon wasn't sure. He remembered Sansa holding his hand when they were children. He remembered her pride, her pain, her cleverness. And somewhere deep down, he believed she hadn't completely vanished. Not yet. Arya trained every day now, her face colder than any. White Walker. If I see her, she said, I won't hesitate. Bran stayed quiet. He watched the past, the future, the now, and in his mind he saw a crown of ice, a woman sitting on a throne made of frozen roots. Her eyes blue as the wall, but in her chest, one piece of red still glowed, like a beating ember. One piece of her heart was still warm. Far to the north, in her frozen kingdom, Sansa felt that warmth too, and hated it. It made her weak. She stood on her balcony, looking out at her army. Thousands of dead stood silent below her. The Night King watched too. He never spoke, but he knew her thoughts. Jon will fight, she said, but he will not kill me. The Night King tilted his head as if asking, will you kill him? Sansa didn't answer. Her crown was growing colder each day. The ice crept across her skin. She no longer needed warmth, food, or sleep. But still, when she closed her eyes, she saw his face. Jon. He had always tried to protect her. He had always believed in her, but belief was a fire, and fire dies in snow. That night she gave the order. March. The dead moved like a river, silent, cold, relentless. White Walkers led them through the dark woods. Giants walked beside them. Ice wolves born from magic howled under a blue moon, and at the front, riding a beast made of shadow and frost, was Sansa the Night Queen. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She simply pointed toward the south, toward Winterfell. Inside the castle, a raven landed on Bran's shoulder. Its eyes were white. Bran whispered, "She's coming." Jon looked up at the sky. It was full of snow, stars, and something else, a deep silence, like the world itself was listening. Arya gripped her blade, Daenerys called her dragon, and Jon stood still, heart pounding, not because he feared death, but because he might have, to kill the last family he truly loved, or die trying to bring her back, and in the sky above, the snowflakes whispered her name, Sansa. Winterfell didn't sleep. The fires were high, the guards doubled, and the walls covered in black dragonglass. Spikes. Jon stood at the top of the battlements, cloak heavy with frost, staring into the dark beyond the trees. Nothing moved, but he knew they were close. Behind him, Arya paced like a wildcat. "We strike first," she said. "We don't wait for them to come knocking." "No," Jon said, his voice calm but firm. "We defend. She wants us to break, to panic." "She," Daenerys repeated behind him. Her voice cut through the wind like a blade. "Stop calling that thing she. That thing is not Sansa." Jon turned around slowly. "She's still in there." Daenerys stepped closer, her silver hair whipped in the wind. "And what if you're wrong? What if you hesitate and it costs us everything?" Jon didn't answer, because he didn't know. Bran was sitting by the fire, surrounded by old scrolls and strange symbols. His eyes were half closed, whispering names from long ago. He was searching for something, a way, a weakness, a hope. And below, in the courtyard, Tyrion watched the people of Winterfell, cold, tired, afraid, and quietly drank from his flask. "We're not ready," he muttered. "Gods help us. We are not ready." But ready or not, the dead had come. It began with the wolves, huge, twisted things with glowing eyes and bones for fur. They charged first, slamming into the outer defenses. The soldiers screamed, fought, died. Then the ice giants came. Their fists broke walls. Their breath turned men to stone. Arrows bounced off their skin. Dragonglass only slowed them. And finally the White Walkers entered the field, their armor shining like moonlight, swords raised. But the silence broke completely when she arrived. riding through the fog, her crown sharp and frozen, her red hair flowing like blood in the wind, the Night Queen. Sansa did not shout commands. She didn't need to. Her army moved like one mind. Her will was inside every creature, every corpse. On the wall, Jon froze. It was her. Her face was the same, but her eyes, those eyes were ancient now, full of pain and cold wisdom. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She only stared at him, and somehow, through all the chaos, Jon heard her voice in his head. Choose. He whispered her name, Sansa, but she didn't answer. Her army clashed with theirs. Blades sang. Fire roared. Daenerys flew over on Drogon, burning rows of whites, but the cold was different this time. Her fire was weaker. The dead didn't fall as easily, and then Bran screamed, not loud, not in pain, but sharp. Clear. She's not here to kill us, he said. Not yet. Arya turned to him, eyes wide. Then what? Bran looked up slowly. She wants something, something only Jon can give. In the chaos, Jon leapt from the wall and into the fight. Sword in hand, Ghost beside him, he cut through whites like smoke. He wasn't trying to win, he was trying to reach her. To reach Sansa. He saw her ahead, dismounting from her frost beast, walking slowly through the battle untouched. Even the dead cleared a path for her. Jon stopped, heart pounding, snow in his eyes, blade ready, but lowered. She came closer. The world faded. The screams, the fire, the war, it was all behind them, and when they were face to face, she finally spoke aloud, only one word. Kneel. Jon stared at her, not with fear, but with heartbreak, and in that moment, he knew he could either fight her grade or try to save her soul from the ice. But time was running out, and so was her mercy. Jon didn't kneel. He stood tall, eyes locked with hers, heart heavy in his chest. He had faced death before. He had killed men, monsters, and even come back from the grave. But standing in front of Sansa, this version of her, this quiet, ice-crowned queen, he felt something worse than fear. He felt the weight of a broken world. Sansa, he said softly, you don't have to do this. Her eyes, burning, blue like frozen stars, didn't blink, but for the first time they flickered. Just for a second, she whispered, I already did. The wind howled around them, wrapping her cloak like a second skin. Her face was cold, pale, perfect, like a statue of someone he used to know. Behind them, the battle still raged. Arya moved like a shadow through the chaos, blades flashing. Daenerys flew overhead again, her dragon roaring fire into the night, melting lines through the snow. But Sansa barely noticed. Her eyes never left Jon. I gave you everything, she said quietly. I followed. I trusted. I survived. And still, it was never enough. You were enough, Jon said quickly. You still are. Her jaw tensed. Then why did no one listen? Why did they choose fire again and again while the North froze and suffered? Jon took a step forward. Because they were fools. But that's not your fault. She laughed, a cold, hollow sound. It is now. And with a flick of her hand, the snow beneath them cracked. Out from the ice rose old, forgotten things, armored dead from 1,000 years ago. Kings, queens, warriors with swords of ice and frozen shields. They circled Jon slowly, their silence louder than screams. Sansa, don't, he said, but she wasn't listening, not anymore. I am not your sister, she said, voice sharp as frostbite. I am not the little bird in the tower. I am not yours to save. He looked into her face, and for a second, just a heartbeat, he saw her. The girl who braided her hair, the woman who stood beside him in war. The sister who always wanted to be stronger. She was still there, but drowning in snow. I won't fight you, Jon said. Her expression cracked, just slightly. Then you'll die, she whispered. A scream cut through the air. Arya, diving. From above, blade pointed at Sansa's back. Sansa turned just in time, lifting her hand, and with a blast of cold wind sent Arya flying into a snowdrift. She didn't kill her, but she could have. Jon rushed to Arya's side. She groaned, still alive. Sansa stood still, her hand trembling. "You held back," Jon said. She didn't answer, just stared at her fingers, shaking slightly like something inside her was breaking. Then came Bran. He was pushed to the field in a wooden chair by Sam. No armor, no weapon, just his eyes, deep, knowing, endless. "Hello, Sansa," he said softly. She turned slowly, the snow still swirling around her crown. Bran looked at her not with fear, but understanding. "You became what you had to be, but that doesn't mean you're lost." Sansa's face twisted. Pain, rage, sadness. So many feelings buried under the cold. "You don't know what I've seen, Bran." "I do," he said. "I've seen worse, but I didn't lose myself." The snow around them slowed. The dead hesitated. Jon stepped forward again. "Come back to us. Come back to me." Sansa's eyes closed, and for the first time since she rose as the Night Queen, she cried. Single tear, frozen before it left her cheek. "I can't," she whispered. "It's too late." Bran looked at her. "It's not." But as they spoke, a deep growl filled the air. The Night King was watching from a distant cliff, and his eyes narrowed. He could feel her slipping, and he wouldn't allow it. With one sharp motion, he raised his hand, and the second wave of death began. The ground shook. A rumble rolled through the snow like thunder under the ice. The second wave came, bigger, darker, older. These were not just whites. These were beasts that had not walked the earth for 1,000 years. Skeleton mammoths, dead dragons without. Flame, giant spiders with frost dripping from their legs. The Night King had opened the final gate, and this time he sent a message, not with words, but with power. Sansa stood still, watching the second army come forward. Her face was pale, her breath slow. But something in her posture had changed. She didn't look proud anymore. She looked trapped. Jon turned to Bran. "We're out of time." Bran nodded. "Only one way left now." Arya stood, blood on her face, limping slightly, but her eyes were sharp. "Tell me what to do." Bran looked at her and said, "Don't fight her, free her." Arya blinked. "How?" "With fire," Bran said, "but not from dragons." Meanwhile, Daenerys flew Drogon in wide circles above the army of the dead. She saw the giant ice spiders, and her eyes widened. She knew they couldn't win this by numbers. She had one shot. She turned the dragon toward the Night King. Flames burst from the sky like falling suns. Drogon screamed through the air, and for a moment the battlefield turned to fire. But it wasn't enough. The Night King raised his hand, and the flames shattered in mid-air like glass. And below, Sansa dropped to one knee. The power inside her twisted. Her fingers gripped her chest. Something inside her was fighting back. Memories. Ned's voice. Catelyn's arms. Robb's laugh. Arya's wild grin. Bran falling from that tower. Jon giving her his cloak. She remembered warmth. She remembered love. And it burned. The Night King saw it. Felt it. He stepped onto the field, moving straight toward. He heard. Jon saw him coming and drew his sword. He wouldn't let him touch her. "Get Bran out of here," he shouted to Sam. Arya ran toward Sansa instead, blade in hand, but not to strike, to protect. Sansa looked up at Arya, eyes wide, lips trembling. Her voice cracked. "I don't want to be this anymore." Arya knelt beside her. "Then stop." Sansa gasped. "I can't. He won't let me." "You're stronger than him," Arya said. "You always were." Jon stood between Sansa and the Night King now, Longclaw glowing faintly, but the Night King didn't draw his blade. He raised his hand, and Sansa screamed. The pain inside her exploded, like ice shattering in her veins. Her crown cracked, her skin pulsed with blue fire. Her heart burned from within. The magic holding her together started to fall apart. She fell to the snow, clawing at her chest. "John," she gasped. He turned, dropped his sword, and caught her before she hit the ground. Her skin was cold, but her tears were warm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shook his head. "You came back." But the Night King raised his hand again, one final blow. To end her, to end him, to end everything. But before he could strike, Bran's voice echoed through the wind. No, his eyes were white, his power full. The ravens screamed overhead, a storm of black wings. Magic, old deep northern magic, swirled around him like a cyclone. The Night King froze, and then, for the first time in forever, he took a step back. Jon turned to Sansa. Her eyes were turning from blue to grey. Her breath was real again. The Night Queen was fading, and Sansa Stark was returning, but they weren't safe yet, because the Night King wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The sky turned black, not from clouds or smoke, but from shadows. Thousands of ravens circled Bran like a living storm, their wings slicing through the air. The Night King stood still, his icy armor reflecting flashes of fire and memory. He looked at Bran, not like an enemy, but like a threat. And Bran, sitting in his wooden chair in the middle of the battlefield, didn't blink. He was no longer just the boy from the tower. He was the three-eyed raven. Sansa lay in Jon's arms, her body shaking. The blue in her eyes was almost gone. Her skin was less pale. Her breath no longer looked like smoke, but the crown of ice still sat on her head, cracked but not broken. "She's fighting it," Jon said. Arya stood over them, dagger ready. "Then we buy her time." The Night King moved. He didn't rush, he didn't rage. He simply walked like death itself, and with each step the world grew colder. Dragons flew in the sky, but Daenerys couldn't reach him. Her fire bent away from him now, scared of his presence. Drogon roared but circled at a distance. No flame dared touch this part of the field. Bran raised one hand, not to fight, but to command the ravens, and they dove. Thousands of birds shot toward the Night King like black arrows. He waved his hand, and half of them turned to ice in midair, shattering like glass. But some got through. They clawed at his face, at his eyes. He growled, a deep, ugly sound like the crack of a frozen. Lake Arya took the chance. She moved like wind, silent, fast, deadly. She leapt through the confusion, blade raised, aiming for the Night King's chest. He saw her, and this time he was ready. He caught her in midair by the throat. Her blade dropped. Her feet kicked in the air. Jon shouted, running forward, long claw, glowing. But the Night King didn't kill Arya. He looked her in the eye and whispered, "No fire, no future," and then tossed her aside like a doll. She crashed into the snow, groaning, coughing blood. Sansa screamed. The sound was raw, human, but also something else. Her crown shattered, the ice cracked beneath her, and from her chest burst a wave of power, not cold, not fire, something new, balance. The kind of power that comes from pain, from survival, from remembering who you are. The Night King turned just as Sansa rose to her feet. Her hair whipped in the wind. Her skin glowed, not with frost or flame, but something older, the true magic of the North, the kind that came from mothers and daughters, from silent gods and burning memories. She walked forward, barefoot on the ice, and the dead stopped moving. Jon stared at her, stunned. "Sansa!" She turned to him and smiled. "I remember now." The Night King raised his hand, but Sansa lifted hers too, and their powers met mid-air. A shockwave blasted across the field. Snow lifted like a wall, then slammed back down. Jon fell to his knees. The wind screamed louder than ever, but still Sansa walked forward. "I was never yours," she said to the Night King. "You didn't make me strong. You just reminded me how strong I always was." He rushed at her, blade of ice in hand. She didn't move, because Bran was standing now, too. And Arya had picked up her blade, and Jon was rising behind them. They stood together, stark blood side by side, and this time they were not afraid. This time, they remembered, and when the Night King raised his sword. Sansa raised her voice. She said only 2 words, "No more," and the world cracked open. The world went silent. No scream, no thunder, just silence, deep and wide like the snow-covered north. The battlefield froze in time. Whites stopped mid-step. The giant spiders shrank into stillness. The winds died, and even the flames from Daenerys's dragon flickered and went still, as if scared to move, because something ancient had been awakened. Sansa stood tall, the shattered pieces of her, crown falling around her like snowflakes. But she didn't need it anymore. Power wasn't in the ice or the title, it was in her choice. The Night King had come to break her, but she had bent the cold to her will instead. He stood before her now, no longer in control. For the first time he looked uncertain, maybe even afraid. Jon stood behind her, breathing hard, sword ready but not raised. Arya limped beside him, her blade tight in her hand. Bran stood still, his eyes glowing with deep green-gold magic, a wind circling only around him. This was the moment, not of war, but of truth. The Night King raised his blade one last time, cold magic swirling around it. The air cracked, the sky split, and with a scream of the earth itself he charged forward, but Sansa didn't move. She closed her eyes and remembered everything. The first time she braided her hair like Cersei, the first lie she told, the first time she thought love could save her, then the first night with Ramsay, the cold cell, the bruises, the way no one came. She remembered standing beside Jon, walking through snow, being called Little Bird, being told to smile, being told to stay quiet. She remembered surviving them all, and when she opened her eyes, they glowed, not blue, not red, but silver, a new kind of fire. The Night King struck, and his blade shattered before it touched her. The pieces fell around her feet, melting into nothing. He stepped back, confused, too late. Sansa lifted both hands. The snow rose in a spiral around her, like a storm held in place by breath. She wasn't fighting him with hate, or anger, or vengeance. She was ending him with clarity. "I am not your queen," she said softly. "I am my own." And she touched his chest, not with violence, but with release. His body shook, his eyes widened. The ice around his heart cracked like glass. And then, silence. He turned to dust, slow and quiet, snow swirling through his empty armor as it collapsed to the ground. His crown fell last, the moment he vanished. The army of the dead dropped, all at once. The giants, the wolves, the spiders, the ancient soldiers. Gone. Silence again. But this time it was peaceful. Jon dropped his sword. Arya fell to her knees. Bran closed his eyes and whispered, "It's done." Drogon circled above and landed beside Daenerys, who stared from the distance, unsure whether what she saw was victory or something else. Sansa stood still, the wind gently blowing her hair. The storm inside her had finally passed. Jon walked. To her, she turned slowly. "I almost lost myself," she said. "But you didn't," he answered. She looked at him, really looked, for the first time in what felt like years, and she whispered, "I remember who I am now." He nodded. "Then come home." She looked at the battlefield, all the loss, all the quiet. "Home isn't what it was," she said, "but maybe it's something we can rebuild." Arya came forward, smiling through pain. "Together," Bran simply said, "winter is over." And in the sky the snow stopped falling, the sun broke through, and for the first time in years it felt warm.